Hey guys, it's Luke. I just wanted to address something really quick. Nothing big, but it's just come up a couple times in the last week or so in the run club, and so I thought it'd be a good time to just kind of address it. So, in Hanson's marathon method, and what I've talked about a lot of times with the long run is that um, the 16 miles, and the 16 miles always comes up for whatever reason. If people just don't believe in it, or they just look at that as the only part of the program, or whatever the case is. But 16 mile always comes up. But recently, a couple people have asked about. So essentially, what they've asked about would be, hey, I'm running 16 miles and it's only taking me, 2 hours and 45 minutes. So should I bump it up to that 3 hours? And so we get into the situation again where people are only looking at part of the situation, right? So not only do we talk about it being a percentage of mileage, but we also talk or a time, and they get stuck on 3 hours, and it can, it varies 3 to 3.5 hours. I feel like it's kind of really more like 3.5 hours is more the point where you kind of limit what your return on investment, because once you get to you basically you get to the point where you extend yourself so much that it's going to take you longer to recover from. And that's maybe not necessarily a bad idea, but I would say you leave that situation to when you're being coached as an individual, not just reading a schedule from a book that's meant to serve a lot of people, right? So it's an individual situation. You have to be careful of those types of things. So I want you to be aware of that, and I also want you to be aware of, we're talking about percentage of mileage too. So it's not just being in that 3 to 3.5 hour range, but it's also being in a certain percentage of your mileage. And so, when you think about that, is me running 2 more miles going to make my percentage of my weekly mileage now? Is my long run now going to be, over 30% of my weekly mileage and things like that? So it's not just one, or you can't just look at one aspect. You have to look at all the aspects too. So just be mindful of that. And I'm not saying that doing that every once in a while is going to make or break your schedule. And that's not the case at all. But I am saying that in terms of being general with the idea in the recommendations there, because again, if you're following a program that's meant for a lot of people, then my general response is going to say, hey, fit within those guidelines. If I'm coaching you individually and we can see how things are reacting with the tempo runs, are you being able to do those long runs and then bounce right back and do, your Tuesday speed or strength? Then you have more wiggle room, and then you probably can adjust for that on yourself as well. But I'd also say too that if this is your first time doing a program like that, so when people usually tell me that they're doing 20-mile long runs and you're looking at the whole of their schedule, everything's built around that 20-mile long run. And so things are spaced out much more before and after. And so in order to stay on schedules per se, to say, okay, I'm going to do a long run on Sunday, and Tuesday I'm going to do strength, Thursday tempo, I'm going to come back and do another long run on Sunday. Is that going above and beyond, say the 3 hours or 30% of your weekly mileage? Is that going to be detrimental? Now, are we going to have to change other aspects of the schedule to accommodate that? And when you have to do that, then I would say no, pull that back, because then you're making the long run more important than everything else going on in the schedule. But if you can do that long run, say you can bump that long run up to 18 miles, but you're able to recover just fine and come back and do your strength workout on Tuesday, that's a whole nother situation. But again, I think that's when you have to rely on looking at how you've handled everything up to so far. You don't want to be in a position where things are going well and then you get kind of greedy and want to bump everything else up a little bit more, and then you end up setting yourself back the last month of the schedule. That's not a situation we want to be in either. So a lot of times the risk, it might not be worth the reward, but that's something that you have to ultimately decide on with yourself. I would say this: if this is your first time following the program in the book or one of the classic schedules, anything like that, I would stick pretty close to that. I don't think it's pretty tough schedule, and I think most people would agree with that. And so you wanting to make it harder might not necessarily be the best thing, just because there's guidelines and you're not maxing out those guidelines. Not everything has to be all maxed out. And I think that just kind of goes back to that mentality where we're talking, we have to run 20 miles for the long run in order to be successful in the marathon. Well, if the long run is the main component of your schedule, then yes, then that becomes a major factor involved. But in our case, we're making a lot of things important, equally important as the long run, and we're setting ourselves up so that we're already pretty fatigued going into that long run, and not starting off with a fresh, with fresh legs per se. And so that, as Kevin always said, with the Hanson's plan, you're ultimately going to those 16-mile long runs feeling like it's going to feel like the last 16 of the marathon, not the first 16 of the marathon. Because a lot of times, especially when you do those 20-mile long runs, you're going into it fresh with several days of recovery, and then you need several days of recovery after. So you just have to be really careful of that. I'm leery of adjusting. It'd be something that I would want to know more about what's going on in the surrounding of your schedule. So how's the last month gone? How's the last 6 weeks gone? Are you starting to feel tired, but you still want to push that out? How close are you to the marathon? There's a lot of things I think you need to consider instead of just looking at, oh, hey, I'm under 3 hours, and hey, I'm under 30% of my weekly mileage in the long run. Let's just bump it up to bump it up. I think there's more to consider there. So hopefully that helps you. I know I didn't give specific answers, but again, I think that's something that as a coach, so if you're working with a coach, that's something that they can specifically look at. Or, obviously if you've been doing it a long time, something that that your body can handle or maybe isn't such a good idea. So hopefully that helps you. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you later. All right, bye-bye.